Okay, guys, so as many of you guys may know, there was this comedy festival in Saudi Arabia called the Riyadh Comedy Festival, where so many big name, prominent comedians went over and they performed for the Saudi regime, and they started receiving a lot of criticism, a lot of backlash. And some of the comedians that attended are now starting to respond to that backlash. I had mentioned in 2 videos ago, I believe, at this point, that one of the first comedians to respond was Jim Jeffries, and his response is one of the worst responses I've ever seen. I'll link to that video in the description of the video below. But the TLDR for Jim Jeffries' response is basically the United States also did bad things, so he created a false equivalence between the two, not recognizing that there's a difference between performing for the people within a certain country versus performing for the government of that country, right? So when comedians perform here in the United States, unless you're Tony Hinchcliffe, you're not performing for Donald Trump. You're just performing at a local club, or you're performing at some other venue. You're performing for the people within the country. And if that was all that was happening with these comedians going over to Saudi Arabia performing for the people, I would think it to be much more defensible. Not necessarily that I agree, but rather that is a much more defensible argument, which is why I'm guessing Jim Jeffries put that in instead of actually responding to the real criticisms. One of the other people who responded recently is Bill Burr, whom Bill Burr's one that I actually was very disappointed to see in this roster, because comedy recently has taken a very sharp right-wing turn, and it's nice to see comedians like Bill Burr who have called this out for what it is. And so it sucks to see him basically just take the Saudi money and run. But he gave a response on his podcast, and will address his arguments.
Everybody took pictures and all of that type of stuff. And the Royals loved the show. Everyone was happy. The people that were doing the festival were thrilled. And yeah, it was just this great positive thing. And I got to tell you, just to be a part of that was fucking amazing. And the comedians that I've been talking to just saying, like, dude, you can feel it. They wanted it. They wanted it. They wanted you to like the people want, like, you know, they go online and they see it. And they want to like see real stand-up comedy. So it was a mind-blowing experience. Definitely top 3 experiences I've ever had. Overall, it was amazing. So thank you to everyone in Bahrain that came out. Thank you to everyone in Riyadh that came out. I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I could not have a better time doing shows for you guys. And it was great to experience that part of the world and to be a part of the first comedy festival over there in Saudi Arabia. I think it's going to lead to a lot of positive things.
So that's one of the things that I've heard a lot of people mention, that this comedy festival could lead to a lot of positive things. Here's the issue with that argument. It's just not true. This idea that by allowing the Saudis to engage in the entertainment industry with the rest of the world, and I shouldn't say allow, by the way, what we're talking about here is Saudi funding and financing some of the biggest name either sports clubs in the world or boxers in the world, because they want to get a better image, of course. But the reason why they're doing this isn't just so people can look at Saudi and think more positively, more favorably for them. It's also so they can gain political leverage.
Comedians have always pushed like the boundaries, and this was like a classic case. Like, I guess this is tipping the cap to the people that set up the festival over there. When they first went to set it up over there, the rules on what they had about what you could say and what you couldn't say in Saudi Arabia, the people running the festivals will be like, all right, well, man, that's game, set, match. If this is like all you can talk about and you want some good comedians, like, this isn't going to work. And then to their credit, they said, all right, what do we got to do? And they just negotiated it all the way down to, like, you can talk about anything, you know, other than a couple things, which was basically, you know, religion, don't make fun of the royals. And other than that, it was everything was like open.
Burr isn't saying what he thinks he's saying here, actually. He's saying here that there were a lot of restrictions, but when there were some back and forth negotiating between the organizers and some of the comedians, they lowered down those restrictions. And he's saying this as a good thing, as it's progress. But here's the thing. The restrictions that they lowered it down to were the restrictions that we already knew about. It was the female comedian whose name I'm forgetting the top of my head. I apologize. Her name's at the screen here. But those were the restrictions that she posted on Threads were the ones that they boiled it down to, that they negotiated them down to. And those restrictions were already bad enough. Those were the only restrictions that at least I was aware of. And those restrictions were enough for me to get really upset by this, really annoyed by this, and feel that Burr has been ethically compromised. But he's saying that that originally there were even more restrictions than that. And so again, I don't like this framing. This framing that, oh, they actually boiled down the restrictions after they got some pushback on the restrictions they had originally placed. But the new restrictions were the ones that these other comedians were getting pushback from. That's what you were getting criticized for. So the fact that there were even more restrictions on top of that, that doesn't make that doesn't make this look better. In fact, it doesn't really change the argument at all. If anything, it actually makes you look worse. So yeah, that's Burr's response, and his response again, he just, I don't know if what's happening here is that comedians are aware of why they were being sent there. They're aware of what the government has been doing. They're aware of the fact that they're not just going over to perform for the people, they're going over to perform for the government. They're assisting the government politically. I don't know if he's legitimately not aware of those criticisms, and he thinks that really the only issue is that he chose to go to a country that had Middle Eastern people, that had people who look and think differently like us, and that this is just a bunch of racist Americans or whatever. I don't know what's going on in his head specifically, but the way Bill Burr and Jim Jeffries are framing the criticisms, the way they are defending their stance on this, it's a classic example of a Motte and Bailey logical fallacy, where the Bailey is the hard to defend position, the one that they really, truly, genuinely have to defend. Going over to Saudi Arabia, performing for the government, taking the government's money, and assisting the government politically. Those are the actual criticisms that people are levying towards these comedians. But they're not used. They're ignoring those criticisms. Instead, the argument that they are addressing, the criticisms that they are addressing, is called the Motte, which is like a much more easier to defend argument. And that's the one where they're just defending the idea that they should be able to go to other countries with people who might have different opinions, who might have different beliefs, who might look different, and they're going over to those countries and performing, right? They're just like us. They're just people. That is a completely separate argument, or it's a completely separate thing that he doesn't need to defend, because those aren't really the criticisms that are being levied at him. He should be directing his defense towards the Bailey, not the Motte. But instead, he's choosing a much easier argument to defend in order to make sure that he doesn't get as much criticism as he's been getting recently, I guess. But anyways, that's Bill Burr's response to this. It's a disappointing response. I don't know. Again, I don't know if this is just Bill Burr not fully aware of the political implications of going over to a country like Saudi Arabia. I would have hoped that he would have done some homework on the country before he went over, or before he accepted the invitation, because even if you're not aware of politics, even if you don't really know who's who Saudi Arabia is or what the government does, even if you're not aware of that, I would imagine that people still have a pretty, an idea that Saudi Arabia is usually viewed as a bad country. Before I go over there, before I perform for the government, maybe I should just do a little bit of research just to make sure that I'm not going to be doing something bad. I would hope that people at least do that, but yeah, it is what it is.